Uh, is there any comments or questions on today's agenda? If not, I look for a motion.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Our agenda is approved. Second, our third item on the agenda is approval of the February meeting minutes. Any comments or questions? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Steve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes to approve the meeting minutes. Item number 4 is a report and vote on the draft fiscal year 2027 Unified Planning Work Program and budget. Dylan, can you give us an update?
I will go through this for you. So the work program, as everyone's aware, describes work that the MPO is going to do on behalf of the region and outlines the budget as well, what that's going to take. This is a federal requirement, have to do by the end of the month. So if you've seen the document, it's image in the pack for you, it goes through a lot of it, kind of formulaic in terms of the things we have to put in there. The things we'll draw your attention to, though, are a lot of the new activities that we put in there. So Brent and Slough is something we've spoken about a couple of times. This is the project happening in the northwest portion of the metro. So if we put that in there, there's been a lot of talk about Vision Zero and how we implement the comprehensive safety action plan. There's language about that in there now in the project. That goes into the funding review subcommittee's recommendation too. So how are we going to revamp our funding process with SDG funds and so forth. The Grimes Land Abandonment. I don't know how much we've really spoken about this, but that line, if you're familiar with that, going up to Grimes, been, I don't know what the official status of it right now is, but it's been proposed to be abandoned anyway. Maybe they've officially permitted abandonment right now. I'm not sure. But there's some work potentially with that. How do we preserve that? What do we do with that? There's been some action on that recently, so we put that in there. Then the thing that's kind of cut off there is 20 in bylaw review. It's been 6 or 7 years since we've updated or reviewed our 20D bylaws. It's probably time to do that. That was a federal a recommendation. We did our federal review last year, so it's time to do that. And I don't know if there's anything else in there, but I think that those are the ones that I recall. Kind of the new stuff. There's always going to be the tip. There's always going to be the funding, will be quick participation, all those things that you normally do. But these are more of a unique thing for the next coming year. So there's still time if you have projects that you want to put in there or suggestions you might have. It's oftentimes easier to know that up front before we get into the year and then we have to amend things. So if you have projects either that you want the MPO to do or consider, or if there are things that you are doing, whether that's DOT or the community, if you're doing some sort of roadway corridor study or something, this doesn't have to just be, it's not supposed to be just what the MPO is doing, it's supposed to be what the region is doing for transportation planning. Please let us know and we'll make sure we get that in there. But right now, this is what we have for you, and if there's questions in there. If not, again, this is up for you for a draft for approval.
Thank you, Dylan. Any questions or comments for Dylan? The draft is due by April 1st, so if you have other amendments, but otherwise can take a vote on it today if that is of interest to the committee.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Helen. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And passes. Item number 5 is a report and vote on the fiscal year 26-29 Transportation Improvement Program amendments.
Yes. Morning, everybody. One amendment before you today. There we are. This one comes from the Iowa DOT. This is their Southwest Mixmaster project in West Des Moines, which will be letting this July. This amendment came due to the project being advanced from fiscal year 27 to 26. There was an updated cost amendment or estimate for this project. And like I said, it's being set for late July letting. So the amendment here is just to increase the federal national NHPP. Not remembering what the PP stands for at this exact moment, but updating that funding by more than $2 billion. So that requires an amendment by policy board. I have to answer any questions. Otherwise, it's for your approval.
Questions on this amendment? If not, I look for motion. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? That motion passes. Next is the federal fiscal year 27 to 30 TIP program development, also Addison.
So we're back at the tip of the iceberg here with the four-year transportation improvement program. So staff will be sending out status updates to members of the technical committee here at the end of March, early April, to begin processing and developing the 27 to 2030 tip. Any projects that will not be let before September 30, 2026 will be required to roll over into 2027. So that's something we'll be asking you about in those status reports. As I said, we'll be sending those out here at the end of this month, early April. And here's just a overview of the timeline in general for TIP development on the next slide. All right, there we are. So we'll be updating that project list through April, reviewing in May, or approved draft TIP June, to send to the DOT by June 15th. And we'll completed TIP by July 15th. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that now. Otherwise, you'll be hearing from us later March, early April about the status reports.
Questions on the TIP update? Item 7 is a report on the active transportation plan update.
Yes. February 11th, we kicked off our revamped roundtables. Previously, the bike head roundtable had met on a monthly basis, and trails would also meet monthly as well. So we split those two roundtables into the active transportation and the trails roundtable. Kicked off earlier in February. Had a very well attended meeting. I think you can see from the photo that we had a full house. Set up the room in a round table. So a very well attended meeting with both community members and staff from member communities. Upcoming meeting topics: trails meeting in June. We'll be talking about user experience on the trails, trail signage, and working to share regional trail data, house that on our GIS. And then active transportation, our next meeting for that is March 11th, 1:30 to 2:30. We'll be discussing walk audits and the Plexa draft e-bike, draft e-scooter ordinance. We'll have Chief McCluskey here to speak to that group and work with them, hear their feedback on the updated draft for that ordinance. We have a request for you here today. Not exactly an exit ticket. It's okay if this comes in a few weeks, but working with the active transportation roundtable on developing the plan to have it hopefully approved by June. And one of the implementation steps that has come up through plan development and our walkabouts with tech members and sent to the Connect plan is having walk audits to assess the safety and the comfort of roadways in the region. And so that group was engaged in a similar exercise. There's sheets up at the front of the room to have you indicate one corridor, one site in your jurisdiction that you think deserves a walk audit location during development of implementation of the active transportation plan. And so I can hand this out later in the meeting, and if you have it done today, great. Please send it back to me. Otherwise, you can email me a scan to my DMA MPO email. And happy to answer any questions about that, but we'll be working with them on walk audits and among other aspects of developing the plan here in the next couple months.
Any comments or questions? For those that were at the meeting last month at the pancakes and policy breakfast, you all heard that Pleasant Hill did a walk audit on the hottest day of the year last year. So I know that you all can also do it when we walked about 1.5 miles when it was 100 degrees outside.
Yes.
You can do it too.
And then that was a walkabout, as we were calling them, the hottest day of the year, and I was not dressed appropriately for that. Walk audits will be a bit more engaged with more people and probably a bit longer of a walk, hopefully, but yeah, so we're looking forward to it. And those in the plan.
Excellent. Thank you, Addison.
Thank you.
Next item is item 8, report on legislative update and the DC list.
Right. So we've got a couple of things for you, and we want to make this interactive too, because I know a lot of you probably have more insight to some of these things than we do. So I think everyone's probably familiar with the SUDAS bill, and this would restructure how the SUDAS board goes. This passed out of the House yesterday, right? So if people want to speak up about this or have thoughts, anything you want from the MPO, please do that. Um, the planning bill, so this would eliminate the smart planning principles. This was also up yesterday. Did it pass out, right?
Yes.
There's not a companion bill yet in the Senate, from my understanding. So that's good, I guess, but it's still concerning. There's bike safety bills. This is something we've spoken about before. And then there's a slew of property tax bills too, that are working their way through. So with these, the MPO, most of our funding and everything comes from federal side. So this is really here. Indirectly, though, it affects the MPO. Obviously, you guys would have an impact on projects that are done, on the work you all do, which affects the work that we do on behalf of the regions. Really want to make sure everyone's aware of these things. And if there's something that you need from the MPO, think that we can help in any way. That's where we want to make sure that we're having that conversation. So I'll pause here real quick. If there's anything that folks want to share, any
On the
feedback, et cetera.
SUDAS bills, there been any change at all on the composition? The cities had, I don't know, one or two reps, so you could appoint your city engineer to that. But the reality is, it was heavily weighted towards home builders and industry, which I know the direction that's headed. It's going to be to lessen pavement thickness, lessen rock backfill for trenches, all those kinds of things. As in Marion, we had developers that wanted to do that. They allowed them to do it, and the street cracked in the middle, and the city was left with the cost to do it. So I know there'll be value engineering both occurring, but it'll be from a home building standpoint, would be my perspective based on that, what I saw from the makeup.
So there was an amendment that got approved yesterday. It reduced the number of seats for home builders and developers, those interests, and added 2 seats for civil engineers. But it's still
Consulting engineers for developers.
Yeah, they didn't.
it's ACEC engineers, so specifically called out for ACEC to have 2 seats.
They didn't really. So on Friday, I got talked to Senator Webster, and then also talked to Senator Jones's attorney, who was directed to correct the bill, because when it first came out, it was weighted for to have more non-engineers, and it still is. And then the other caveat, which was a real problem, was it said that cities should pay the costs above and beyond what SUDAS requires. And so a number of people went to the committee. I did not go to the initial committee meeting, but look, no one thinks this is a great idea. I'm not. I mean, we could all rant about how how bad this is, but on the other hand, I can tell you from the conversations I lost my whole Friday, that effort of just going in and saying it was stupid didn't work. So it, quite frankly, pissed off the legislators pretty good. They were very hot when I was talking to them, saying that people came in just were actually condescending, is what their words were. So it didn't work, and so frankly, my strategy, and I called Brent Morlock from Bettendorf, a colleague, because he has a good relationship with Senator Webster, and we both called him separately. And the strategy was to get rid of the cost thing, and so that was changed to now the cities need to have a hearing and provide a report explaining what the cost increases are. So in our case, for example, like many cities, we'll do a SUDAS supplemental spec adoption. We'll just, as part of that adoption, have the cost increases or anticipated. Sometimes it might be none, and get it. I went through the whole gamut with them of like, there are things that don't make any sense that how do you really calculate the cost of, and he's like, well, then it might just be none. But the bottom line is, what the legislators feel was they proposed something a year ago. They felt like they were stiff-armed, and so they were like, we're done, with negotiating. It's kind of almost the take, and so they were pretty upset. And the bottom line is they want cost to be considered much stronger when proposing these things. And one of the things they vented about was that they called out a few committees, I'm not gonna name them. Some of them are here, not here, but in our MPO. And the response they get was the consultant for the community was just saying, "Oh, it's per SUDAS, can't do anything about it per SUDAS," and that's actually a false claim. That consultant was wrong. I mean, SUDAS, as we all know, the design manual is a tool; it's not a requirement. And when cities go, for example, like in our city, we SUDAS might say a residential street that has parking on one side should be 26 feet wide, preferred, not required. We said, well, we're going to make it 27 feet wide because of the width of a vehicle park plus emergency response 20 feet. That is a city of Des Moines standard. So you don't hear me going to developer saying that's SUDAS. So that put kind of a that's why the legislators are targeting SUDAS because they're upset because people are falling back on it saying it's the end all be all. And that's not really true. And so, and then the other thing I talked to them about for a while was the board makeup. And that was one where we were not going anywhere. And there, the bottom line is Webster's like, I'm not going to bet on that. He's like, this is going to be 8 non-engineers or not 8 non-engineers in private, and then 7 from the public. And he goes, I'm not betting on that. And he goes, if you can't convince one non-engineer to go with what you're proposing, then it shouldn't go. That's what he said. And trust me, I went through the whole gamut of ethics, and then I'm the one sealing the plans, so I don't want engineers, but we also do need to there's not a doomsday. I mean, he does say that yes, the board makeup that ultimately approves changes in SUDAS is this 8 to 7 board, if you want to call it, or 15-member board. But we still can have our SUDAS board provide recommendations toward this board. And I did bring up multiple times and even followed up yesterday that they did make, I felt, some errors, one of which is quite frankly, was the ACEC. I explained to him that while consultants are great, you don't have hardly any seats for city engineers like me and Brett. And he said that was not my intent. He goes, he told me on Friday that he was going to fix that. So, but when to my knowledge, it hasn't been fixed. So I have reached out and sent them information to try and. My recommendation was to either use APWA because ACEC is just consultants. But we're not going to get past the 8 to 7. And then the other thing I did talk to him about was, again, this is worth so many different conversations, but someone told him that DOT specs are less stringent than SUDAS specs. And that doesn't make any sense. Maybe we can argue it subjectively, I don't know. But I explained to him that I said DOT specs are generally designed for highways and bridges. SUDAS specs, for example, we don't have bridge specs. We don't have bridge standards. So we use DOT specs when it's on a state highway or for bridges or when it's a federally funded project being led by the DOT. And then we use SUDAS for everything else because SUDAS has much more for water main and sewers. In fact, DOT just references SUDAS for the water mains. And I explained all that to him. And he goes, oh, okay, so maybe I should add the SUDAS back in. And that's what we left the conversation with. But when I last looked, now it says that the local agencies shall write a report for what increases DOT specs. And I said, it doesn't make sense to have a bill that writes about the SUDAS board. And then while we all follow SUDAS, have something that says, well, we need to write a report justifying what goes over the DOT specs. So it's been very frustrating to say the least. I lost, quite frankly, a couple days on this thing last week trying to do some damage control. But the bottom line is it's not going to work to just say how stupid it is. That only made him more mad. And I can tell you that was because I had some very fun, entertaining conversations on Friday, to say the least. So that's where at least it was on Friday, and then I see it came out, and then there was Bill.
Yeah, there was one other item in the amendment that got approved yesterday that relates to the standards used on a project can't change once the project begins.
Yeah.
And there's no definition about when the project begins, so it's just something else.
And I did question them on the board too. I said, I guarantee you, I said, what's going to happen is some of these people that have been put on there are not going to care about some of the stuff. I said that you have on there the American Building Council, which is mostly made up of HVAC contractors. We don't even have HVAC specs. And he was like, well, I don't even know how that, he denied, he didn't, I don't know how that got in there. We all know how it got in there is they're trying to get as many, they're trying to create the votes. They're trying to create the 8 to 7 votes, what it is. So, yeah.
So, yeah, question real quick on that. So did they take out the requirement that we pay above and
They did. That was what we focused on all Thursday, Friday, because we can't do that.
Yeah, no, we can't. So that's gone. We just have to have a public hearing that, hey, well, this is above and beyond the cost, but we can do that at the time of plat. We accept the plat, right?
Well, you could, yes, or I intend to, like every year, Des Moines approves the supplement, like we have our council we adopt CDOS as the standard, and then we have them also adopt our supplemental specifications, which has those things. And then at that time, I would put forth the anticipated estimated costs, what those are. But yes, that would be another way is if you had a specific requirement for development that's not maybe in your SUDOT supplemental. But then you
so
do it.
so we can do it when we pass a resolution to accept the supplemental. That would be an accept.
That's what I'm planning to do.
Do you have to do it annually, or do I just do it? I'll just do it on July 1st before anyone figures it out.
What?
Never again. Yeah.
No, there's no time frame.
Okay.
And so I'm just saying that's the approach I'm taking. And I've talked to Webster about that. But yeah, if you did something in a subdivision and said you're got to do all these extra things,
I like
then he does want he would probably say you need to have a hearing and have costs and everything and yeah.
But there's no, I don't have to deal the cost. I don't have to. I mean, I can just do an estimate.
It's just it's having the hearing. But Webster wants to have a hearing to give people an opportunity to say, hey, these standards you're approving, like Des Moines requires an embossment on our manhole lids that has a picture of a can with water, to say don't dump in here. Like that people could come to the hearing and say, hey, that's going to cost us an extra whatever, and don't do this. At least hear their voice, I guess. That's what it is.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you could have those hearings twice then, because legislation on this 6/7 vote requirement originally had language in there, and we were worried it was going to take away conditional zoning. I understand that has been protected, so we can still do conditional zoning, but not that we would put a zoning condition on the manhole cover needs to be a boss thing. But you could say they have to improve roadway as a condition of zoning, or to a certain width or whatever. And I would assume that if that was different than what the SUDAS standard was, you would have to have a hearing again later on that requirement.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's where there is a lack of understanding of what SUDAS is, and that doesn't help. There isn't like a maybe standard, like I said, the roadway width example is there's not like it shall be this.
So okay, this passes. They shrink the pavement thickness down to 6 inches, slab on grade for asphalt, 5 for concrete. Do we reconvene the Central Iowa Standards Group and start writing? Well, this is what we kind of want in Central Iowa for our supplemental standards.
Well, we still say they shrink things.
Well, the SUDAS board, so they get the votes together and they say we're going to reduce the standards in SUDAS design to a lesser degree. Do we just develop our own regional standards again, which is where SUDAS came from?
Well, yeah, if that would be the case, I mean, I would probably start with doing a supplemental.
But I mean, that way we have like a uniform supplemental across the metro, just so our local contractors kind of know this is what a sidewalk's always going to be. This is what the road's always going to be.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Ideally, but yeah, the one wrench is this committee. Again, if you look at the people who are going to be on it, no offense to them, but they're probably what's hopefully going to happen is we keep the regular SUDOS board together, and that's who puts forth changes and updates to SUDOS, and then they vote on them. I don't quite see an HVAC contractor or someone from HVA spending a ton of time writing up SUDOS, whatever it is, specifications or Right. I mean, you know what I mean? It's just not, you know,
Okay.
I mean, maybe they could.
We'll wait till that.
Yeah, it's again, this has been a terrible idea to say the least, but it got to the point where we weren't getting anywhere, to where people were hanging up and storming out and stuff like that and losing their temper, and so it was like we got to take it if we can. And, you know, how stupid it is, which trust me, I agree, it's stupid. You know, it's not been work. So
It sounds like it went farther than actually what, in our conversations with the Home Builders Association and other developers council groups, that they were just asking for a representation on the best board. So this has gone way further than what the developers were even asking for. And in conversations with several of those developers, they recognize that this is not helpful. And our conversation with them was, well, we'll stop approving rezonings so that we can't do development anymore. And that's how we're going to protect ourselves from installing infrastructure that doesn't meet standards that work for us. And that was alarming to them that we have, you know, I can't not approve a site plan or a plat if it's already zoned and meets our standards, but I can stop approving rezoning requests. And that's what my stick is going to be, to tell them that they can work with us. So hopefully there's still conversation to come, and it's a long road ahead. And we'll see where it goes, but
yeah, and even when I talked to them, I said they claimed that one of the people, like the representative for the real estate council, whatever it is, they were going to try and ask like Caleb Smith. Like, okay, that'd be great. That's fine. Like Caleb at least understands Sudas and is, you know, and I mean at least somebody who's well, I know, but I mean, at least it's something better than you know, whatever else they can come up with. But yeah, sorry.
The irony is that like what, 2-3 years ago, it was the building codes, plumbing, electrical, whatever, wanted changes to it. And then when we pointed, I mean, they pushed it all the way through the state. It was ready to be adopted. And I think it even did get passed. And then we were pointing out from that it was going to take away exemptions to the builders. It was going to take away exemptions that they currently have under our existing code. And it was, we didn't intend for that. And then it was back to the state to try and get them to scrap all this legislation that discussed for 4 months because they had this. We had a meeting on tax abatement yesterday and with developers, and they're urging all of us to call legislators and tell them what horrible legislation it is. I'm like, it's going to go over really well. We can't say that. But it's been pushed.
any other?
Yeah, at the end of the day, though, we accept public improvements or development. So if those developments are built to substandard, I mean, why can't we not accept them?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I feel like we've got, you know, we've got some leverage in some different areas if it goes this far, this extreme.
Another thing, we require 4-year maintenance fund. I'm going to require a 10-year maintenance fund. Those are going to be more expensive to have. It's going to make it more expensive for the developer.
And all you have to do is convince your council, right? And then that's it. And it's it.
But, you know, but there's all sorts of all sorts of reasons that you can.
Question about waiting until it's built to say that it's substandard.
Right.
Make that comment very early, because the first time that a road gets built and you say it's substandard, you're not accepting it, and tell them to tear it out and rebuild it. We'll be at the legislature the next.
But it is a shame that what you said earlier about like it's not one person's fault. I mean, I put the blame mostly on the legislators in this. Is they put forth a bill a year ago and then said they were stiff armed and claimed they were stiff armed, but I don't ever remember like any formal reach outs of like, well, we want to at least have some people out of the board. And that was the whole downside. It's like, I mean, I was sitting there on Friday. It's like, why couldn't we have just had these conversations like months ago and not, instead of just reacting like, you know, like we're 4-year-old children throwing temper tantrum. I mean, it was, you know, and again, my conversation with Webster was civil, and trust me, I have my disagreements with the least, but some of the earlier ones in the morning were not. It was leaving the room, and yeah, so they were bad to say the least. So about what some people had done, you know. So
We're looking right now.
no, you
And then, any other comments or questions? If not, let's move on to.
It's not letting me flip it so we can hit the thing. I did have a couple federal things and then just DC list real quick. So federal wise, things are starting to work forward in reauthorization bill. I won't go through all this in great detail, but there's several committees. There's a House committee, the Senate's got a few committees. And the House things are moving forward. They've talked about having something ready to show in March, at least on the House side. Senate might be a little further behind, but at least the Environment and Public Works, which is the more major one, is still something in March, potentially April. A few of the other committees are maybe not quite as far along. So things are progressing. If we look at what the priorities are for MPOs, and this comes from Association of MPOs, NERC, League of Cities, Association of Counties, all those groups working together. Obviously, increased funding, not only for SDBG funds, but also for planning funds that we get for the planning work that we do. The big thing I think will be, when the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, IIJA, when that came out, there was a whole bunch more discretionary programs. And I think everyone's in agreement that while more money was good, the way it came out, where everyone had to apply for it, everyone had to compete for grants, maybe that wasn't the best approach. So can we keep the same funding level or increase that, but make it more formula funding so that the funding comes either to the states, to the MPOs, and it just becomes part of the SDBUG process or something like that. And it just makes it a little more straightforward how we get it. And there seems to be support of that across NASHO and NERC and AMPO and the committee themselves that are putting it forward. So there seems to be alignment there. It's just a matter of when you're dealing with this, but also appropriations and all the ICE stuff and now a war, like, is this going to be the priority that we get this done before September? That's kind of the big question right now. Getting to the DC list real quick, there was, I think, a link in the agenda again, or a copy of it in the agenda again. Please send us, we asked for materials by the end of March, essentially, so we still have time. This will be what goes forward in the partnership trip in June. So there's still time to, to make those changes. But really what we're looking for are projects that isn't just a wish list. These are things that are actually going forward through, build or some other discretionary program, earmarks or whatever they call, congressional directed funding, things like that. So we can, when we go there, we say, there's actually an application before you. We want your support on this. That's the point of those meetings when we go to DC. So any questions about that? And I know some of you have sent your changes and everything to us, so thank you for doing that.
Done. We'll move on to the next item, which is the funding review update.
All right. So Marcus and I will tag team this a little bit. But as you know, we've been working through this process to review the funding, just kind of take a pause and review how we operate funding and how do we implement some of the comprehensive safety action plan, the long range plan, and so forth. We've built into the schedule here. The committee, the funding review committee has been meeting since October, and we purposely built in that we would take a pause at this time and make sure that we're bringing everyone else up to speed of what's going on. So we talked to the policy committee a couple of weeks ago when they had their last meeting. Talking to you today, that funding review committee will meet again next week. So we want to bring you up to speed of what they've been talking about. And I know we've covered a few things in past meetings as well. We just kind of want to back up and make sure you're up to speed on things. So Marcus will take the first one.
Yeah, so the first one is the scoring tool. We showed this to you several months ago when we showed the project analysis. You could draw your projects and it could give you different scores and points based on data we have. We've now added in the project application. So on the left side of the screen there, we built this in so that you can look and see the data on the right side, then fill out your project application on the left side. And as you can see there, as you fill out the form, the survey, the application, whatever I call it, you'll actually see live scoring. So if you have the traffic volume that meets that threshold, you're going to be more than 10 points. And your total points for goal 1, that subtotal is now 30. And your overall point total is 75. And as you go through the application process and get it finalized, at the end, you'll see a score for the final project. So as you go through that, you will have a very clear understanding of what your score is for that project.
And this is available for people to review.
Yeah, we'll send the link in the post meeting chat so you can play with it. It is currently being developed still. Things might break, might not work properly, just be aware of that. The data that we have is not finalized. The project application is not finalized, but it brings in a lot of information from the current and PGL.
Before we go on, I just want to recap. So we're taking a sneak peek at some of the things that we're looking at here. So a couple of these things, like this one, would probably be across anything we do. This is something we'll implement if everyone likes that. Some of these others are going to be more of like, here's where we're thinking it's a range of here, and that's where we'll want. But we'll need to pick a direction and go forward with it. So, funding cycle. This is something we wanted to address, and I think we've discussed that maybe at a very high level here. So currently, everyone's familiar. If you can read this, we kind of tried to lay out the how the process works from when we start the SDBG and TAP grant cycle to when the TIP is finally approved. Because all this is building towards the TIP. And it's really in sequential months. We start, application is released in December, it's due in January, it's scored in February, we go to the committees in March, and so on and so forth, all the way up to final TIP submitted to the DOT in July. One thing that we've heard, and so we've mapped out here for you, is an alternative where we start earlier. So maybe we'd start with the application release July, due in August, scored in September, and so forth. That way, there's a good 5 or 6 month gap between when it has to be the TIP. And the reason that we are exploring this is some of the feedback we heard from all of you is if you know what projects you have funded before your budgets are due or when you're developing your CIP, that would be helpful. So this is a way we could do that. From our standpoint as staff, we're fine with this. Like it's something we're going to have to do at some point anyway. So whether we do it in December or whether we do it doesn't really matter. But we want to get your feedback on this too. And we've shown it starting in July, it can start August. That's flexible, but we just wanted to show you that there's really nothing from the DOT's perspective that requires us to start when we've been starting. We just need to make sure it's done in time for the TIP approval in July. So pause there for a sec if anybody has question, feedback there. This one is very similar, just shows the next time we do it. This kind of shows the 4-year lead time in funding. So you're applying for it here, you're not going to get the funding for 4 years. Since we're going to be doing 2 years at once, this is just showing that some of that money is going to come in 3 years, it's going to come in 4 years this one time. While on that note, I will point out too, there had been discussions of do we do funding every year? Do we go to every 2 years, 3 years? We're saying let's just stick with the same thing, that just do it annual. This next time notwithstanding, we'll do 2 years at once. We're making enough changes potentially that we don't want to throw in another change on it, and everyone seemed to be comfortable with doing it annually. So that is not something we're suggesting right now.
So, I mean, we're, starting earlier. So in July when the application's open, but like, maybe I missed it. Sorry, I was trying to follow, but we still seem to kind of it's like we just took everything and shifted it forward. What would be the reason for shifting everything forward instead of like spreading it out a little bit? So like maybe it's like, what an application opens July and then applications are due in September.
Yeah, and we can so a couple things here. We're flexible on when that is. What we wanted to do was that you have an answer from the board of this project's getting funding by the time you need it for when you're doing budgets. So whenever that is, if you need that in December, you need that in November, that's what we're trying to shoot for. The part about spreading it out, we can do that. And actually, I think with this tool that Marcus just showed us, that's going to make some of this easier, right? From the application standpoint, especially from us scoring it. By the time you submit it, the project's scored. There's not going to be that time we need. So we can give you longer to do the project applications because it's going to cut down on the time we need to scoring, and we can still hit that timeline, right? So there's maneuverability within that couple months period there.
But I do like your comment on that. It's when do we notify when we're awarded the money? That helps. That makes sense. Yeah.
So I'll move on. We can come back to this. Now there's 4 variables that we're looking at of how do we do this, and a couple of these variables are how do we do it in terms of, and all of this is related to safety, and then the last 2 variables were like how do we pay for it. So I'll let Marcus cover the how do we do it aspect of this.
Yeah, I don't want to know how we find it. So obviously we have our SVG scored criteria. You know how this functions, you know all the background of why we're potentially having this conversation about safety. We've done a lot of work. These were last updated in the last long range plan. If you want to stop there, don't go back. Like, perfect. Currently we have 23 out of 100 points. And these 100 points are the points that are awarded for the different LRTP goal sections. We currently have 23 that are dedicated to safety. Part of those come from the pedestrian access and facilities section that's kind of shown there as number 10. And then down at 11 is where you get your other safety points. So the thought here is going on the slide. We have 4 different ways that we can do this. One is we can add more weight to it, so we can add more safety focused variables or criteria. And then as you move along and you have a low minimum, medium minimum, and a high minimum, we set a minimum threshold for the number of points that you have to achieve in that safety score to be eligible, be recommended, be whatever, however you want to phrase this, to be moved forward in the project scoring process. So that's the first variable. We are having some conversations with the technical committee members who are on the funding review about what should be included in that safety scoring. So that's ongoing and will continue to be worked on as we move forward into build up. The extent of the Vision Zero program, so as you know, the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan sets a target of 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2045. For this, we showed a few months ago, just showing where are we currently and how do we get there. The trend line pretty aggressive following that trend line. This shows project prioritization and the different levels of priority for corridors, and then how the methodology works for prioritizing those corridors. And then what we had initially shared with the funding review committee was, in our SS4A application, we did not get funded for the low cost countermeasures, but we got funded for the RSAs, the roadway safety audits. So this Vision Zero program that we're presenting extends out this 2-phase package over essentially the 10 to 20-year period, continuing the roadway safety audits and then implementing the low cost countermeasures program. And the way we've done that is we've essentially said we can have 10 safety audits on 10 corridors for $100,000 each. That makes it $1 million. And then on those 10 corridors the next year, we're going to do $200,000 worth of projects for a total of $2 million. So 3 years and $3 million annually, and we just carry that over for the time period. One of the questions that we received is, do we really have enough projects to sustain that? And what we've identified is our corridors on the high injury network, we have 340 corridors with an average of 1.5 miles, right? And then you can see how the distribution of corridors goes. With the point having high, some of these cross jurisdictions, so the projects will be very specific, but that's right down. So essentially we said, yes, we have plenty of projects to do. So then it got into a conversation and how many we should do per year. So we said, if we just targeted critical corridors, we'd be looking at a cost per year over the 20-year period, reaching out to that 2045 timeframe, about $500,000. The high would be about $2.3 million. Medium corridors would cost about $2.2 million. So the total cost to do every corridor through this cycle of roadway safety audit and countermeasures would be $5.1 million annually. So we put together the spectrum, of course, because why not? Gives us an idea for scenarios, and we presented this to the funding review committee, starting on the left with the most cautious, that catalyst level, looks at why don't we just do the roadway safety audits that we've got funding for from SS4A and leave everything else to the local communities. And then as you go across, we get to the champion, And that's where we do all of the corridors. We fund everything at 80% regional money with a 20% match from local communities. And then we note here that in the three foundation, leader, and champion categories, it would likely require one full-time employee of the MPO who's focused primarily on safety at this program because of the number of projects that they'd be involved in, helping manage and helping fund and working with. So go to the next slide, I think. So this is what it looks like at the annual cost. Just showing that MPO, the 80% of the funding. So if you have champion, it comes down to $4 million. And if we just say this on level, it's a little $750 million.
So by doing that champion, we get that 5.1 that Mark mentioned before to do everything.
And I think there's one more slides here. Yeah, perfect.
With the funding for the position that you're proposing or talking about, where would that come from? Is that out of this bucket of money or is that separate MPO money?
That'd be a separate, depends on, there's a few different options for that. That's something we'll be talking to the review committee next week. But essentially we could take, there's a few different ways we could do that. We could raise assessments to pay for that. We could use SVG funds and take some money off the top for that. We'll have another reauthorization bill here soon that will probably increase our PL funds, so we can use some of that. We can do a cost share that's just based on the amount of miles on the high injury network or something to that nature. So again, whether that's through additional assessments or through that cost share, there's a few different ways. And it could be a combination there. So that's something we're exploring. We'll take that to the review committee next week and see what their thoughts are, what they prefer.
Any other questions on those review areas?
Yeah, just primarily talking infrastructure countermeasures, or as opposed to educational outreach.
These countermeasures would be primarily infrastructure. And the thought is you'd identify improvement in the road and safety audit, and then the next year or the year after that, you'd be prepared to implement some of those recommendations. Safe education and components like that, we've talked about internally. It's how do we handle that? Right now, it's not coming out of this Vision Zero kind of program cycle, but I think we're open to those conversations as we move forward.
Yeah, I really think that the Vision Zero roundtable that met yesterday, at least from my experiences previously in Florida, I think Florida has a very strong model that was started, I hate to say it, 30 years ago, as part of the ICE-T with the safety management systems. They have a community traffic safety teams. Those have evolved over the last years to be supported from a staff perspective from Florida DOT at the district level. That some had been supported previously at an MPO or regional planning council level, depending on the area of Florida, but they were primarily county-based, and they really bring together all the individuals that are involved in the 4 E's. And I look at safety as you've got 3 or 4, whatever number of E's you want to put in there. Those are the legs of a stool. And if they have to be complementary. And if you have only infrastructure and you don't have any education or any emergency services, you've got a lopsided stool, and it's not going to work. And I think Florida's seen, I know my experiences in Lee County, Florida, prove that out, that we were seeing, we got people together and we were starting to make a difference. And it also happened to expand out to a broader context in public health. So that's, from our standpoint, Des Moines, one of our biggest struggles right now is to get a dedicated staff person to really focus on safety, to really push our plan forward. And a lot of that is outside of that infrastructure. It's engaging people and building community support.
Yeah, I do think that if we were to get that full-time position, the MPO doesn't build. right? So we're still gonna have to take the low cost countermeasure funds and have them go to the communities to build stuff, build whatever the improvement is. So we have that staff person to potentially manage this project or this program. But if they have availability and time, I think education could definitely fit into whatever their work and responsibility are.
Yeah, because what we put up the reflective borders around traffic signals. KCCI happened to notice it, and it was a slow news day. They only had the State of the Union later that day, and so they talked with us about it. But it was 2 years after Axios had also mentioned. But my point is, you need to have those public outreach elements to help the public understand why this is there, so they develop a further understanding, if not ingrained in their psyche. This is why we're doing it, and this is the safety, and there is a reason there's safety, so they be a little bit more mindful. The same could be said for leading pedestrian interval in signal timings, or just crosswalk enforcement that Des Moines Police has recently had some successes with, and we've seen with the reflective backplates on signals a greater safety improvement than what FHWA shows in their research they have on their websites.
Well, I trust that John and Mark and Lynn, who are representing this committee here, will take this message forward as the conversations continue at the Funding Safety Committee about the importance of those non-infrastructure items to be included as well. Anything else on these? If not, funding.
So now getting into more of the funding aspects, there's two elements here, two variables here. I think everyone's familiar with or hopefully is familiar with this. This comes from our long range plan where we show the different categories of funding. So you've got set aside for bridge and reconstruction, transit, and so forth. What we looked at is, do we add another category? And so again, going to the spectrum, one, at the minimum, we can say, no, we're not going to create its own category. We're just going to fund any sort of safety improvements, any sort of Vision Zero that Marcus just spoke about through the existing category. We'll figure out a way to do that. Or we can set aside different amounts of funding to then pay for that, to basically become another category of funding that then would be where the roadway safety audits and that sort of program that we just discussed would come from. So you can see there's different, 10, 15, 25% there, and how much that would be able to. And I think better is probably to be able to look at this, where you can see existing categories here. So, 30% set aside for system capacity, 20% for bridge, and so forth. And then you can see as we move along that spectrum where the funding would be coming from. So, for example, in this dedicated category, the next one, we're taking 5% from system capacity and 5% from reconstruction to create the 10% pot of safety for new. And so you can see how that progresses as you go along there, to where this final pillar one, you're creating a 25% new pot for safety dollars by taking 10% from system capacity, taking 5% from bridge, and so on and so forth. So that, let's see if there's something else after this. Right. I think the other point here is that you can mix and match these a little bit. So up here, we talked about that Vision Zero program, the thing that Marcus just spoke about. And then down here, you've got the different funding pots. So you can make them more kind of one-to-one. And if you see this here, we only need 4, but we're creating a pot that's got 4.6 in this category, for example. So now you've got a little bit left over that can maybe be used for things that aren't the low-cost safety countermeasures, that really maybe for the bigger projects, because there's going to be times where it's not all low-cost. They're going to be pretty significant projects. And you can mix and match these a little bit to maybe where we create a program where we only need 2, but we collect funding for 4.6. Now you've got 2 million set aside, or a little over 2 million for those bigger programs, if that makes sense. So that's something that we can play around with, but this will all tie together here in a moment when we get to the end. And then the fourth thing is looking at a local swap. And so this is something we've discussed a little bit before. The goal would be to try to get federal funds put more to projects that make sense to federalize. And then for especially low-cost safety countermeasures potentially, or other projects that are just smaller in nature, keep those local funding where possible. And I think people are familiar with the DOT used to do this, and then when the infrastructure bill passed, just their fiscal constraint didn't allow them to do that with MPOs anyway. So we've looked at this a little bit. We've talked to our finance folks. We've got a finance committee that's made up of a few finance directors just to get a sense of what funding sources could actually be swapped. So you can see up there, bond revenue probably can't be swapped unless we really wrote the bond language correctly. But things like property tax, hotel, motel, potentially, there are some sources that could be swapped. So that was a big question from the committee of, what's even the potential to do this. We also have spoken with some other MPOs. So we learned that so Dallas is the one that we've spoken with before. I think maybe we've mentioned that. Columbus, Ohio is also putting together a program, also talking with Dallas to get this to go. And one thing we learned there is they are hiring PFM, a financial consulting firm, to help set that program up for them. And we thought that was a really good idea. And so you'll see that recommendation coming through here. And just we can update the slide because we do have information on their scope and cost now. It's costing $30,000. They've sent us the scope. We could easily do that. So that's something we'll probably pursue here. And again, looking at the spectrum, we don't have to do this. We could just say, nope, that's a cool idea. Maybe someday we're not going to do it. We could study it a little bit further. So we're not going to do anything right now, but maybe we'll hire that company. We'll look at it, do something, or maybe we develop a pilot or just go all in on it. So those are the levels of assessment that we put together here. So now I want to bring all these together and look at a few different scenarios. So you've got the 4 different variables. Each variable had 4 different kind of options within them. We can start mixing and matching. And this is what we proposed again to the review committee a few weeks ago. So scenario 1 is kind of the minimum of everything, right? We can say we're going to put a little emphasis in safety. We're not going to do the funding swap. We're not going to set aside a new funding program. Not going to put any money additional beyond the Safe Streets for All grant or the Vision Zero program. Maybe we'll add a little more weight to the project, which is everything I just said. Second scenario is a safety push, and you'll see scenario 2 and 3 are kind of mirroring or kind of opposites, other sides of the coin of each other. So with this safety push, maybe we put a high minimum on safety. So we take our existing scoring system, we say you've got to score really well in safety, but we're not going to put a lot of money into a different Vision Zero program. We're not going to set aside funding for that. And we just kind of toy with the swap idea. The other one, like I said, is a little bit of a different one where we don't put as much emphasis on safety with the existing scores, knowing that we have a other pot of money set aside just for safety. And then we do go a little further in on the swap and on the other Vision Zero or the new pot of money for safety. So after speaking with the review committee about this, they like the idea of keeping that low minimum there. That way we're not saying every single project we do has to have a really high score in safety. So they like that idea. I think they like the leader one here, if I'm not mistaken, and then maybe moving these other ones over under this third column as well. So we don't go all in on the swap yet, but we do figure it out a little bit further. And then we do set aside funding, but maybe not as aggressively in the safety target. Am I capturing that correctly for other staff and the folks that are involved with that? So now what we're putting together is, okay, we've kind of homed in on this. So we're making some adjustments. We'll go back next week to that funding review committee and say, here's what it could look like with those suggestions. But of course, we want to get your feedback too. So if you're completely not in agreement with this, that'll change our course. But that's the conversation to date. I know that was a lot to go through.
One question though, off of the swap. I guess I'm just trying to understand the big difference between the pilot program and strategic leap. I mean, the pilot program, it seems like you bring in PFM and they develop a program for you. Would they still do that under the strategic leap?
Yes. So really, we're asking in those different scenarios, unless we just do status quo, don't do anything. I think we said PFM would come in on any of those other ones.
Okay.
Really, yes, the pilot program would just say, we're being a little more cautious. We'll put together a program and see how it goes before we say we're totally in. It's not substantially going to change a whole lot, to be honest with you. But I think it made people a little more comfortable in saying, this is definitely going to, yeah, exactly.
Any other comments or questions? I assume these will all be sent out in the follow-up email, so you
Yeah,
have
these will all be in the
to
package.
review and think about it so that you can give any feedback to.
And I will say we met with the three tech folks on the committee, Mark, John, and Luke. We did meet with them prior to this meeting and talk a little bit more about this low minimum, like what does that entail? What are other changes we need to happen with the scoring? So we've got a good direction there that will feed into all of you at some point, but know that you have representation on that committee. If you have questions or feedback you want to give and you don't want to give it to staff, feel free to speak up for you. Feel free to give it to you guys. Okay, I think that's what we had for that.
Excellent. Please take time to review that and give your feedback as it impacts all of our projects as we move forward. Make sure that your perspective is shared and community's experience. Next item, informational item, upcoming events. Addison?
I'm sorry.
Any upcoming events you want to mention?
That comes to mind.
Right, any non-action items of interest?
Yeah.
I do want to quick recognize someone here, Mike Ludwig. This will be his final meeting with us. I have to say I've been proud to work with him. It'll be an understatement. Mike's dedication, integrity, vision is incredible. Let alone being an incredibly technically sound person, and I think it reflects when you look around Des Moines over his career, some of the things that Des Moines has accomplished. Mike's been an incredible leader in our community, and to say the least, and keeping the vision, keeping our ship focused on the vision. And you look at the success stories of some things that happen in our community is awesome. So sad for us, but on the other hand, he's not moving, he's not leaving. Hopefully going to the Big 12 tournament next week, but he's staying around here, so we'll still run into him. But yeah, he's retired. So I just want to give a shout out to him. He's been incredible, and so this will be his last meeting. Yeah.
Congrats. I'm sure all of you have seen it, but if not, none has his call out for community project funding right now that are due, applications are due tomorrow for that as well. Anything else? If not, we will adjourn. Next meeting is April 2nd. I will not be here. Don will be your chair at 9:30. Thank you, everyone.